Office of Undergraduate Research Education Series. Today it is on Annotated Bibliography and Citation Ethics. Our speaker is Lux Darkbloom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lux, and you might occasionally see or hear my cat, Margarita, who will be co-presenting with me today. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but first, I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. So I'm a librarian at the Marriott Library. I work with primarily I work with the College of Cultural and Social Transformation, but also with the first year engineering students. And sorry, I'm multitasking here, admitting folks. I also work with the First Generation Scholars Program. So I'm kind of all over campus peddling my information literacy wares wherever they will have me. But today I'm going to be talking with you all about annotated bibliographies and citation ethics. So this is a big, broad topic. If you have questions, please feel free to enter those into the chat, and then I'll address those at the end.
I just wanted to remind everybody that this event is being recorded, so please mute yourself and turn your camera off to have the best experience. And like Lux said, you can put your questions in the chat feature or unmute yourself when she invites you to. And I wanted to remind everybody to fill out the event evaluation. I will put the link in the chat at the end of the presentation. But the Europe scholars and the SPUR scholars, to get credit for attending this, you need to fill out the evaluation. And I just wanted to remind everybody that the mission of the University of Utah Office of Undergraduate Research is to facilitate and promote undergraduate, student, faculty, collaborative research and creative works in all disciplines throughout the University of Utah campus. In recognition that excellence requires diversity, we pursue this mission through equitable programming that promotes diverse representation and social justice. And we would like to acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm that the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. And Lux has already introduced herself, but I will remind you that she's an associate librarian for graduate and undergraduate services in the Marriott Library. And now I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
So our objectives for today are to learn what an annotated bibliography is and the elements that comprise it. We're going to talk about citation formatting guidelines kind of in a broad way, rather than getting into how to format specifically according to a particular style. And then we're also going to, oh my goodness, my video is just wacky today. We'll be talking about ethics as it relates to citations. So what is an annotated bibliography? Composing an annotated bibliography helps a writer to gather one's thoughts on how to use the appropriate information contained in cited sources. It helps the reader to decide whether to pursue the full context of the information that you're providing. So if you're submitting a bibliography to a professor, they could then in turn look at your citations and pursue those. It also helps researchers to understand the disciplinary terrain. So things like what has been explored by researchers before and what might be explored in the future. Depending on the purpose of your bibliography, different elements will be more important than others, depending on both the purpose and your citation style, I should say. Your faculty member or instructor will also give you guidelines or be able to help you to prioritize what's most valuable there. So each citation contained in an annotated bibliography begins with a citation in one style, and that can be decided by a professor or by yourself, depending on the specific circumstances. And each citation is then followed by a paragraph, the annotation, and that will give you information about the source itself. So generally, very broadly, what the source is about, how it's accurate, or how how the writer has determined accuracy in the source and how it's relevant to the rest of their work. So as far as the elements of a citation go, or an annotation, there are quite a lot. We want the author information, so first name, last name. You'll of course get like the standard stuff that comes with every citation. So who created it, the title of the publication that it's published in, if that exists, if we're dealing with journals, and how you retrieved it, and along with information like pagination, volumes, all of that stuff that we would use to then locate a source. But the elements of an annotation are a little bit different because, like I mentioned in the previous slide, the annotation is going to serve as your justification for how and why you chose these specific sources. So we get author information, the author's purpose. I'll go through each of these. A lot of them will be, I imagine, pretty straightforward, but in case we need to drill down a little further, we will. So as far as author's purpose goes, what is the author's purpose in writing that specific publication? Do they state the purpose, or are you supposed to infer based on what they've implied? Does the author have like a particular message? As far as audience information goes, we are thinking about to which audience the authors were writing. Are they addressing scholars, the general public, other teachers or professors? And is that audience then reflected in the writing style of the author? Author bias, and there are so many kinds of bias, but does the author show any biases or make assumptions about the rationale that the article rests on? And if they do, it's really helpful to identify what those assumptions or biases are. The information source itself, like which methods did the author or authors use to get that information or data? Is the published work that you're drawing information from based on personal opinion, experience, interviews, library research, laboratory experiments, that sort of thing? So there's a broad spectrum that we can draw information from, and all of it is considered legitimate. The author's conclusion. So not only what conclusions did the author draw, but are they specifically stated or are they implied? Kind of like, what is the purpose of this publication? And do they make sense? Like, are you able to see that the author has maybe approached writing this piece with a conclusion already in mind? Have they stated it? That sort of thing. Conclusion justification is pretty similar. Are the conclusions justified? Do they make sense from the research or experiences of the author or authors? And are those conclusions in sync, essentially, with the original purpose of research and supported by that research? And again, we can ask about bias here. It's always good to double check or triple check. Are the conclusions at all skewed by bias? As far as the relationship to other works goes, we want to ask, how does this work that we're citing compare to other works that have been cited? Does it conflict with conventional thought or what scholarship has already established for us, or government policy? So basically, is it in sync with what we generally understand to know and be true about the world? That's a very broad one, so bear with me, y'all. Are there any opinions that aren't cited that the readers ought to be aware of? Or is there any evidence that is balanced or weighted in a particular direction, like framing one perspective as more important than another, maybe? Then we have the time frame. So is the work current? And depending on what you're studying and writing about in your research, currency will have more or less significance. So for example, if you're writing about a poem that was written in the 1500s, it's probably not going to be, strictly essential that you have, say, literary criticism taken from that same time period. You could use more recent or less recent sources in that case. But if your research is really focusing on something that has that timeliness is really important to, then of course you'll want to make sure your sources are more current. So if the source that you have included in your annotated bibliography isn't current, if it's not, it's often important to explain why. But otherwise, you can just kind of frame it in terms of like whether it's valuable to your research or not, or important to it. But also we want to consider, how does the time in which it was written reflect on the information that was contained in the work? So if it was written long ago, things may have changed, or, depending on what you're writing on. As far as significant attachments go, we want to look for things like appendices, bibliographies, illustrations, graphs, figures. Are they valuable? If there are none, should there be? So those are all really good questions that can be answered by your annotation. For citing, we have lots of options. I think out in the world, there are somewhere around, last I heard, probably like 10,000 different citation styles. Some of these are created by professional organizations. Those are generally the big ones like APA, MLA, Chicago, Turabian, IEEE, things along those lines. Then you also have citation styles that are unique to particular publications. But regardless, whatever the citation style that you have determined you'll be using is, that will be reflected throughout your annotated bibliography. You can't shift from one citation style to another unless you have permission to do so from the powers that be, we'll call them. All of the citations should be formatted according to that style. Sometimes in an educational setting, like I mentioned a little earlier, we will have the option to weigh in as writers. Often our professors will give us the option on a citation style. So bring to that conversation the things that are important to you. But like I said earlier, because we won't be talking about how to format citations in a particular style today, I'm going to direct you to these resources here for citation formatting. So style manuals are a wealth of information, and all of these are available to you through the library, either electronically or in print. And if there is a style guide that you'd like the library to get that we don't have, just let me know, or you can suggest a purchase. directly through the library's website on the main page there. I can even show you how to do that later. So for citation formatting resources, these are some really probably my most favorite ones. In this presentation that I'm going to be sharing with all of you, like the slides to, these are all linked, so you can access them directly. But these link out to the online writing lab at Purdue University. The first three here, actually this one as well. And within those guides, they will have a section just labeled introduction. And there you'll actually be able to generate citations. Not a whole bunch of them. I think that with this little drop down menu, they offer you 3 or 4 choices. And then you would enter in your information here and it would generate a citation for you. It is a product of the Citation machine, which I don't know if many of you have used it before, but it's a free online citation generator. There's also a famous one called Son of Citation Machine. And while they are both very popular, neither of them is especially accurate because both APA and MLA, for example, have seen recent enough revisions to their style guides that often these citation generators like Citation Machine haven't been updated. So I will be introducing you to an option or a couple options later for citation or bibliographic management systems. With things like RefWorks and Note, those might sound familiar to you. The big takeaway here is whenever you use a citation generator, if you're not writing your citations painfully by hand, just be sure to edit and review to make sure that the things that were automatically generated don't have any errors as far as the content goes or the way that it's formatted. Things like italics and commas are incredibly important. So that said, let's look at some resources for writing annotated bibliographies. And like I mentioned earlier, all of these will be linked out, but I can take time to show you where you can get to these through the library's website, but I'll talk about each of them a little bit. So the first two are connected. There's the University Writing Center and the Graduate Writing Center, which are housed at the Marriott Library. These links will take you to their appointment registration systems. And I believe at the primary University Writing Center, you can make appointments for half an hour to an hour. I'm not sure about the graduate one. I'm not sure if there is a time limit. Probably so, though. Below that, I'll be introducing you to the research guides in just a moment. We talked about the online writing lab at Purdue, which I've linked in the previous slides, and Noodle Tools. This is one that you may or may not have heard about. So while we are here, I'm actually going to close the presentation and go to my browser because I would like to show you how to locate these services on our website, if that's okay. So lib.utah.edu is the Marriott Library's main website. There is an awful lot of content on this site, so it can be kind of overwhelming. If you ever feel lost, please feel free to reach out to me and say, hey, I can't find this thing that you mentioned, or I've heard that this exists, or I've even used it before, but I don't know where it is now. So feel free to reach out anytime via email or phone or drop by my office. But otherwise, I'll give you a quick and dirty overview of the website. So right now we are looking at the main page. In the very top row here, you'll find some helpful things like off-campus access. You can log into your library account. You can also schedule rooms for the library here. But the services that I was talking about will be housed under this tab, the services tab. And these are split into spaces and services. The services, both these lists are in typical librarian form. They're really long, but they're in alphabetical order, so pretty easy to navigate. If I am looking for example, I mentioned earlier, you can suggest a purchase. You'll find that here. If you're looking for research guides, those are also accessible here. But they're a little easier, I think, to reach just through the main website under research guides. And it is under these research guides that you will find both subject-specific guides and course guides. So here are the many subjects, the producers of the guides, and you can also search by subject here or by type. So there we go. Quite a lot of different options. Going back to the main page, I mentioned Noodle Tools on our previous slide that we were on, talking about annotated bibliography resources. The Writing Center is also available through here. You can just find by typing in Writing Center into the search bar. You don't have to go through the tabs. But if we go to the databases, I know this is an unusual location to look for it, but this is where we have put our link for Noodle Tools under the ends. So again, we've got a really long list of databases. Technically, Noodle Tools is not a database, it's a citation management system. But the reason we have it here tucked away is because if you go through this link to create your account, it will be a free account. Otherwise, if you go to noodletools.com to create your account, it will charge you, I think, something like $11. But we do have an institutional subscription. So if you click this before you go into your, or before going to noodletools.com to register, you'll be all set. And I would actually like to take a moment and have you all do that, if that's okay with everybody. So you will create just a personal ID. You can make it whatever you want. And then be sure that you can log in. Now, in our guide here, I've linked to a LibGuide about Noodle Tools, and this will show you not only how to create a bibliography, but how to create your account, how to set up project management. It has this great feature where you can create note cards and outlines, and this LibGuide, which is linked in my presentation, will walk you through a step-by-step on how to do each of these things. So Noodle Tools it's an interesting service. It can be a little bit frustrating for folks sometimes if they have already have experience creating bibliographies and they don't need to learn how to do them. However, even if you are simply inputting your information into the given fields, it will format the citation for you correctly. So, and it is up to date, thank goodness. It offers, I want to say, 5 citation styles, the big ones generally. But if you have a citation style that isn't supported by Noodle Tools, let me know and I can help you find one that is. Another free alternative that's great is a plugin for Firefox called, oh my goodness, I just blanked on it. Zotero. There we go. Zotero. So because it's a plugin, you don't have to have administrative rights in order to install it, which is nice. So that means you can be on a university computer, you can be on anybody's computer, and use it long-term, short-term, no big deal. And it'll allow you to create a free login as well. All right, now we're going to talk ethics. This is the real fun part, I think, of our discussion. So the phrase ethical use of information is one that's used pretty regularly by the American Library Association when we're talking about how to develop information literacy skills. We want not only to have the ability to find, to ask the questions that we need to ask, but to locate that information and source it, so cite it in an ethical way. And according to the US Copyright Office, we're going to be talking about, well, these three things here: copyright, plagiarism, and fair use of information. So before we jump into that, I do want to talk about what copyright is according to the US Copyright Office. It's a type of intellectual property, this is a direct quote from their site, that protects original works of authorship as soon as an author fixes the work in a tangible form of expression. So that isn't limited just to text. It can be visual, creative works also. In order to avoid copyright infringement, though, we are all required to cite every source of information that we use when we are presenting a new information product, like a research paper or something more sophisticated like a thesis or a dissertation. We're obviously required to provide a source for every, or a citation for every source of information that we have included. And we are, of course, going to avoid the best we can copying from anybody else's words or creations. In other words, plagiarism isn't just bad, but it's a federal law, and there are statutes and case law that give us guidance on how to see an outcome legally, as far as when somebody steals our work or copies our work and tries to pass it off as their own. We also at the U of U have, it's called the Code of Student Rights and Responsibilities, University Policy 6-400, more commonly known as Student Code. So Student Code also prevents us from plagiarizing. So I want to talk about the ins and outs of plagiarism a little bit more deeply than maybe you've experienced before. There are lots of different types of plagiarism. We have this huge list here, and I'm going to go over pretty much all of these different types. The first one, duplication, is just copying. So literally copying and pasting or typing word for word the work that you are drawing information from. It can also mean duplicate in terms of publishing the same work twice under different titles. So we'll run into duplicate in that more original sense coming up here next. So intentional, direct, or verbatim plagiarism, that's when you totally neglect to cite your sources, or you can misquote sources. And it doesn't really matter if it's intentional or unintentional until you, well, I mean, it does matter. I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. It matters, but as far as like how the outcome of a plagiarism accusation will go, if you have unintentionally plagiarized, you will generally get a gentler response to that. But yeah, unintentional / accidental plagiarism is, again, citing sources that you, or not citing sources, neglecting to cite sources, I apologize, misquoting sources, or unintentionally like paraphrasing a source, using similar words or even a group of words, or even just the sentence structure of a work. Source-based refers to incorrectly citing something. Oops. So that one is pretty straightforward. Bibliography, plagiarism, refers to copying a bibliography from another scholar directly. You can definitely look at other folks' bibliographies. You can even borrow from them, but copying them verbatim, not a great idea. Look at it as a place where you may find additional sources, but possibly won't. Always a good idea to look at other folks' bibliographies anyway. Then we've got outline plagiarism, which is copying the format or the structure, aka the overall outline of a work. Then there is mosaic or patchwork plagiarism, where you're borrowing phrases from one source or multiple sources, or you're using synonyms to describe a certain thing, like in the author's language, while keeping the same basic structure and arriving at the same meaning as the original work. Then you've got paraphrasing, which you can do in an ethical way by including a citation. But if you paraphrase by just altering a couple words or even keeping the same sentence structure, that's considered plagiarism. And then the last one is self-plagiarism. This one is unusual, and a lot of folks don't know about it, but you can plagiarize yourself. If you have written a paper for one course and you use that exact same paper, but repurpose it a little bit for another course without the permission of either instructor, whether you're using just part of that work, your original paper, or the whole thing, that is considered self-plagiarism. And that also goes against student code. So we don't want to step on any of those boundaries, even a little bit. When in doubt, cite. And fair use is a really interesting concept. I've got the legal definition of it right here at the top, where it promotes the freedom of expression by permitting the unlicensed use of copyright protected works in certain circumstances. So some of those circumstances can be in criticism, it can be in parody, it can be in education, it can be in news reporting. Those are all considered fair use. But fair use is generally evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So they use these 4 factors in order to evaluate it. What is the purpose and character of the use, whether it's of a commercial nature or if it's for educational purposes or nonprofits. Courts will usually look at how the party who claimed fair use is using the copyrighted work, and they're generally less inclined to find that nonprofit or educational or non-commercial uses are unfair. They are almost always considered fair. Instead, they tend to balance the purpose and the character of the use against the other 3 factors. So transformative uses are more likely to be considered fair too. So that's like when you add something new, or with a different purpose than the original work that you are citing or referencing, and you don't substitute it for the original use of the work. The nature of the copyrighted work refers to the degree that the work that was used relates to copyright's purpose of encouraging creative expression. So that's with creative works or imaginative works like movies or books or poetry or even songs. They're less likely to support a claim of fair use than using a factual work. So as far as unpublished stuff goes, that's also less likely to be considered fair use. So if it's for a more technical purpose or even for a purpose of informing others, then you will have a little more leniency shown your way. For the third factor, the amount and substantiality of the portion used is a big deal. So courts are going to look at both the quality and the quantity of the copyrighted stuff. If the use includes a big portion of the copyrighted work, then fair use is much less likely to be found. That said, though, some courts have found the use of an entire work fair under certain circumstances. So I can't emphasize enough how case by case these evaluations are. In other contexts, even a small amount of copyrighted work was determined not to be fair because the selection was a really important part of the original work, or it is the heart of the work. And then the fourth factor is the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. I had to read that one verbatim because it's a little bit of a mouthful. So here, courts like to review whether and to what extent unlicensed use would harm the existing or future market of the copyright owner's work. So that can be tricky because they're looking not just at the current marketplace, like I said, but they're trying to make a prediction about the future to see if there would be substantial harm if the work that is borrowed as fair use, if it were shared, if that would harm the original content creator. I hope that makes sense. That's probably the trickiest evaluation factor, I think. I think that might be about it. These are the sources that I used to compile our presentation here. And some of the services that are available through our library or the greater community.
I just want to thank you. That was great. I'm nice to see you. Sorry I signed in a little late, folks.
No worries.
What awesome information. I know for our undergraduate researchers who are submitting to journals. And so one of the things is did you talk a little bit about Creative Commons attribution? And do you know a little bit about that? Because we, at our journal for undergraduate research, it does have Creative Commons attribution. And so I want to make sure if students have any questions about that. Our goal is not to prevent them from being able to republish works elsewhere. And so that is why our student journal has that status. But I know that it, in the journal world, attribution and all that, and that can look really complicated. And so how would you recommend that as they are submitting the journals that may have Creative Commons attribution or other kinds of status, but they want to submit the work elsewhere, how might they negotiate some of those complexities of that you were describing? And
wow. That is a really good question. I think that I would actually, if I were about to submit publications to Creative Commons public journals and non-Creative Commons journals, I would actually make an appointment with our copyright librarian and have a conversation with her about it. And her name is Allison Maurer. She's wonderful. And I can give you her contact info in the chat here. If I can type while I am talking, not very well. She's located on the 5th floor of the library. You can meet with her by appointment, but we have a whole unit dedicated to scholarship at the library, not just for faculty members, but for undergrads and grads who are interested in publishing. But I think that would be honestly they could be a huge resource for you. Someone asked, where can you find examples of good annotated bibliographies? So in the online writing lab links that I'm providing in my presentation, an OWL for each citation style, they will include a sample bibliography section, including annotated bibliographies. Also in the annotated bibliographies lib, my colleague, Donna Ziegenfuss, is the person who made our annotated bibliography guide. And these are just a few examples But I'm also happy to meet with folks as you are compiling your bibliographies. We can meet in person or via Zoom or on the phone or via email, whatever works best for you. I'm very flexible. But if you have any questions at all and you're uncertain about something, you can send them my way. If I don't have an answer, I can connect you with a colleague who has that expertise. And I don't know about you all, but I am kind of a nerd and I really enjoy writing bibliographies. So please feel free, if you need a pair of eyes to edit a bibliography for you, I'd be happy to do that also. Or if you're having trouble with using a citation generator, or if you would prefer to write out citations on your own, I am happy to help either way.
Somebody asked when they registered how to formulate better keyword searches.
Oh, this is a great question. So for keyword searches, how do you find like quality keywords? I like to keep a running list of when I'm doing searches, whether I'm using Google, Google Scholar, any of the databases, the library catalog. I'll keep a running list of keywords that are I think of them as like meaty nouns. If I could only express my research question or my thesis in nouns, how would I do that? One way that I like to do that is just by talking it out, either to a voice recorder or writing in a real like stream of thought or stream of consciousness sort of way about my topic. And then I will literally go through and circle those meaty nouns that represent my topic best. So a lot of times you'll run into trouble with nouns like if you're writing a paper that has a distinct perspective, like a persuasive essay or something, and you might run into questions around like, how do I determine the influence of X, Y, or Z? And you think, well, maybe influence would be a great keyword. But I'm here to tell you it is unfortunately not. Stick to those keywords that you will have to negotiate with whatever search engine you're using, because it's not just technology, but people who are indexing things. I also recommend, if you find a good source, you can look it up in the library catalog. I'm going to share my screen really quickly, if that's okay. Here we go. So I'm going to take us to the library's website, and I'm going to do a search for, let's say I'm writing a paper about, let's look at the information seeking behaviors of undergraduates. So here I have my two big keywords. If the term that you are using, or keyword phrase, if you're interested in those words being found in that same order, it's often helpful to put quotations around a phrase. I also like to do this thing with an asterisk that will allow me to search for multiple word endings, or you can use it within the middle of a word too. So say you wanted to search for something like women or woman, you could do something like this. But otherwise, then I would go to the catalog. I'm going to find something that's a potentially useful source here. And by looking at, let's say, let's pretend that I'm researching this from this perspective here precisely. So if I click on a source, I can scroll down a little bit, and not only will I find my keywords highlighted in the context, I'm also going to find maybe some potentially useful keywords in this description here, or under the subjects. These are subject headings. And I think that exploring your topic is one of the the best ways you can possibly find other keywords, just reading what are recurring phrases or who are key stakeholders, or if you're writing about something like a piece of legislation, using that title, for example. But the keywords should be just like the most bare bones description, I think, of what your topic is. And like I said, a lot of I keep track of my keywords, like a little running list. And a lot of the times, a keyword that works great in one search engine or one database will be terrible and will produce no results in a different search engine or a different database. So it takes a little bit of negotiation, but not too bad, I don't think. Let's see. Annie says that she loves this question about keywords. Keywords have different effectiveness based on time. Very true. So an example, a keyword search that is popular, has a ton of good hits for the 1990s, may not be super popular or in wide use for literature being published in the 2020s. Something for all of you to consider is to connect with your mentor about popular terms. That's a really great idea. Or you feel free to connect with the library and subject experts too, that if they think that they can give you some guidance there. My office is on the first floor of the Marriott Library, just down the hall from the library cafe. So if you take the west entrance, so the one that's by the bookstore, if you go in through the west entrance doors and just head forward, you'll be right on my hallway. And the cafe will be on your right. And then there'll be just past the cafe, I think it's like a door to the cafe and then the door to my office suite. So it's just a couple doors in, really. That was a probably more convoluted explanation than it needed to be. But yeah, I hope that y'all will reach out if you need anything, even if it's a donut from the cafe and you just want to hang out with a librarian. Let me know. I am like delighted to help with anybody's bibliographies or research.
Well, thank you very much, Lux. This has been a great presentation.
Thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Here's a QR code. I did put the link in the chat. So thank you, everybody. And just to remind everybody, here's our contact information. We're in the SIL Center, which is just east of the Union. We're at our.utah.edu, and you can email us at our@utah.edu. And thank you again, Lux. We really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with y'all. If you ever need any help with your research, let me know. Thanks, everyone.